Trev's Hockey Show. I'm the Trev. That's too sweet. Anyway, my apologies for the lack of content this month. December is by nature a busy month, but I mean, then you add a kid's birthday in there, and having to do Christmas with many different components. Yeah, it's a busy month. So again, my apologies for the lack of content, but I'm here nonetheless. Today we're continuing with retired numbers, but this will probably be the last retired number I talk about in 2024. Today we're talking about the third number retired by the Ottawa Senators. And despite today's subject being chosen first overall in the 1996 NHL entry draft, it's not really known as a superstar in terms of like offensive defenseman or making a difference defenseman, even though he was a stay-at-home defenseman and very solid in the position. Offensively, he wasn't known for his points. I mean, you could probably count on fingers how many points he got in a good season, and that was exactly what he needed to do. So, but if we're talking in terms of duration with the team and longevity, then we're definitely in the right place. So, having said all that, we're talking about the number 4, which is worn by Chris Phillips. Let's talk about it. All right. So Chris Phillips' 17-year career, all with the Ottawa Senators, began on June 22nd, 1996, when he was, as previously mentioned, drafted first overall by the Ottawa Senators. Now, Phillips has the distinction of being the third first overall pick for the Ottawa Senators since they entered the NHL. And with the results that came after the Senators drafted first overall in 1995, that was when they drafted Brian Berard. The concern in Ottawa when it came to Phillips was, is he going to play for the team? And I brought up Berard because the concern with Ottawa was, would he play for the team? And, after Berard was sent back to juniors and asked for a trade, the answer was no, he wasn't going to play for the team. And with the Ottawa Senators at the time, in terms of success in the regular season and what really lack thereof, they were statistically bad in their first 4 or 5 years. One can understand the team's concerns. But unlike Berard, after spending one more year in junior, Phillips didn't request a trade and did manage to make his debut with the Ottawa Senators for the 1997-98 season. Phillips would make his debut for the team on August 1st, 1997, while getting his first point on October 15th, 1997, and getting his first goal on October 30th, 1997. So knocking all the firsts out in the first month. That's not a bad thing to do at all. All told, in his first season, Phillips would have 16 points in 72 games, and as the Senators would advance to the playoffs for the second straight season. Now, in the playoffs, the Senators would be playing upset, taking out the first-seeded and heavily favored New Jersey Devils in 6 games, but ultimately the steam ran out just as quickly as it came in the conference semifinals when they lost 5 games to the eventual Stanley Cup finalists in the Washington Capitals, with Phillips adding 2 assists in 11 playoff games. So again, the first season was not really offensively telling, but in terms of defense, he was starting to find his groove, and that was the first season. The 1998-99 season would see Phillips limited to only 34 games, but the Senators would still manage to win the Northeast Division, with Phillips still managing to add 6 points in those 34 games. But again, their playoff experience, it would only last 4 games, being swept by the eventual Stanley Cup finalists in the Buffalo Sabres, with Phillips going pointless in 3 games. The 1999-2000 season would see Phillips back to playing in a more fuller schedule, managing to play in 65 games, adding 19 points to the cause, as the Senators would again advance to the playoffs. Only this year the Senators would be playing provincial rivals in the Toronto Maple Leafs for the first time in the team's playoff history. Well, in the first time of the Ottawa Senators as we know them. If we're talking original Senators history as well, then this is the first time the Senators and the Maple Leafs have met in the playoffs since 1927. Could have been 1922. I think that's a 2. 1922. But much like the previous year, though, the Senators would, only have a short playoff run, seeing the Maple Leafs eliminate them in 6 games, with Phillips adding only 1 assist. The 2000-2001 season would be another solid season for the Senators, seeing the team finish first in the Northeast Division to advance to the playoffs for the 5th straight year. However, a late season injury would see Phillips play in only 73 games this season, adding 14 points in the process. Now in the playoffs, the Senators would again play the Toronto Maple Leafs, with Phillips playing in only 1 game. But in that 1 game, Phillips would make his first NHL playoff goal against the Toronto Maple Leafs, and really would only be one of 3 goals scored by the Senators in this playoff run, as they were swept and outscored by the Toronto Maple Leafs. So another ouch. The 2001-2002 season would see Phillips add a bit more in terms of production, more so than in previous years anyways, breaking the 20-point barrier for the first time and scoring 22 in 63 games with the Senators, who again advanced to the playoffs and even managed to make it to the conference semifinals. But unfortunately, the semifinals saw them meeting the Toronto Maple Leafs again, and for a 3rd straight year, they'd be eliminated in 7. But in 12 playoff games, Phillips didn't register a single point. So, defense, but no production. It's not the first time he went pointless at this point, and early spoiler, it won't be the last. 2002-2003 season would see Phillips be a huge help in the Senators not just winning their 3rd Northeast Division championship, but also the club's first President Trophy, with the Senators putting up a team record in wins with 52 and points with 113, as well as allowing 186 goals against. Now, that wasn't the league least, but it was definitely in the top 5. So to be a team to allow less than 200 goals, that's pretty solid on defense. All told, Phillips would add 19 points in 78 games. And in the playoffs, the Senators would eliminate former captain and former Senator Alexei Yashin and the New York Islanders in 5 before moving to the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, the Flyers were a team that did them the biggest favor in this year's playoffs in eliminating Toronto Maple Leafs. So to return the favor, the Senators would eliminate the Flyers in 6 to move on to the conference finals for the first time in franchise history. But unfortunately, they would face the New Jersey Devils, and despite falling 3-1 in the series, only to tie it up and even it up at 3 games apiece going into Game 7, they would lose that heartbreaking Game 7 to the eventual Stanley Cup champs, with Phillips putting up a career high as far as playoff production is concerned, with 2 goals, 4 assists, and 6 points in 18 games. Now, the 2003-2004 season would be a close one as far as the Northeast Division was concerned, and it saw the top 3 separated only by a series of points. The way it worked was Ottawa finished 3rd in the Northeast Division, falling 2 points behind the Bruins, who had 104, and a point behind the Maple Leafs, who had 103. They had 102. So 2 points out of first place in the Northeast. That's how tight the Northeast Division was for the 03-04 season. But more importantly, Phillips would play a full 82-game schedule for the first time in his career, adding 23 points in the process. So you're getting a better production out of this man now. Now in the playoffs, however, it was like hitting the repeat button for the Senators, because once again, they would play the Toronto Maple Leafs. And even though Phillips would score the Game 4 winning goal, the Maple Leafs just could not be solved, with the Senators being eliminated in 7 games, and with that Game 4 winner being the only point Phillips would score in said 7 games. Then we had the big one. So, like most players affected by the big one, Phillips would play in Europe for the 2004-05 season, but when the NHL returned for the 05-06 season, Phillips would come back to the Senators and would add 19 points in 69 games. Nice. Including a career high with 18 assists, while the Senators would once again win the Northeast Division. Now, while the team didn't win the President's Trophy, they did manage to tie the team record in wins and points, which is utterly impressive to do it twice in the span of 5 years. Put together 50 wins, 100-point seasons. That's impressive. Now, in said playoffs, the Senators would make short work of the defending Stanley Cup champs in the Tampa Bay Lightning, eliminating them in 5 games, before being made short work of by the Buffalo Sabres, being eliminated in 5 games, with Phillips adding 2 goals in 9 playoff games. The 2006-2007 season would see Phillips awarded the alternate Captain A, something he would wear for the duration of his career with the Senators. And this ultimately would be Phillips' best year in terms of offense. Now, this year would ultimately see him score 8 goals, which and match his career high in assists with 18 to make a career best 26 points. And that was in a full 82-game schedule. So, like many players that came out of the lockout, they benefited from the rule changes. And, this fact that you're seeing Phillips put up more offense for a stay-at-home defenseman, that's awesome. Now, in terms of the playoffs, this would be a pretty easy ride for the Senators going up in the Eastern Conference playoffs. First they would, and this was also a year that the Maple Leafs weren't in the playoffs, so anything they did was easy for them. First, they would eliminate the Pittsburgh Penguins in 5 games. In the conference semifinals, they'd eliminate the New Jersey Devils in 5 games. And in the conference finals, they'd eliminate the Buffalo Sabres in 5 games to make it to the Stanley Cup Finals for the first time in franchise history. Again, as the Senators as we know it, if we're talking overall Senators history, then this is the first Senators appearance in the Stanley Cup Finals since 1927. Now, unfortunately, though, the Senators would face the heavily favored Anaheim Ducks, who, like the Senators, made this series pretty easy work, eliminating the Senators in 5 to win the Stanley Cup. Now, in 20 playoff games, a career best for Phillips went pointless. And unfortunately, this would be the furthest he would get with the Ottawa Senators in the playoffs. The 2007-2008 season would see the Senators just manage to squeak into the playoffs. Like, just manage. I'm squeezing my fingers on this one. That's how just manage it was. And this was ultimately, one of those things. The team starts off hot, and near the middle, they put together that hot-cold kind of season and just barely managed to get the 7th seed in the Eastern Conference, with Phillips adding 18 points in 81 games. Now, unfortunately for the Senators, this playoff run, like many others, would be short, as they'd be swept in the quarterfinals by the eventual Stanley Cup finalists in the Pittsburgh Penguins. You gotta remember, this was the year Crosby was starting to develop really well, so they had to be the team to fall to the Penguins. And much like the 2007 playoffs, Phillips again went pointless. And just like that, all good things come to an end, as the 2008-2009 season would see the Senators fail to make the playoffs for the first time in 11 seasons. That's 1996. But Phillips did manage to contribute 22 points in a full 82-game schedule. The 2009-2010 season saw the team manage to get back to being a playoff contending team, advancing a year away from the playoffs, with Phillips having another solid season, matching his career best of 8 goals as part of his 24 points. In the playoffs, however, his production was pretty much a carbon copy of the 2008 playoffs, which was a carbon copy of the 2007 playoffs, with Phillips going pointless in 6 games, as the Senators would be eliminated by the defending Stanley Cup champs in the Pittsburgh Penguins. However, the 2010-2011 season would be like a digression of sorts, as the Senators would fail to make the playoffs for the second time in 3 seasons, with Phillips managing 9 points in 82 games. For the 2011-2012 season, despite supposed to having to be a rebuild year for the Senators, the team did manage to put together some form of success and advance to the playoffs by finishing second in the Northeast Division. Now, this would also be the season where Phillips would play in his 1,000th NHL game on February 9th, 2012. Now, all told, Phillips would add 19 points in 80 games. A nice improvement from the previous season. The playoff run, however, that would be short again, as the Senators would be eliminated in 7 games by the New York Rangers, with Phillips actually managing an assist in those 7 games. So after 5 years of no playoff points, he finally gets an assist. Then we had another lockout. So while this lockout would not be anywhere near as close as damaging as the big one was, it would still see the NHL only play a 48-game schedule, which would also see Phillips play all 48. And on top of that, it would also see Phillips add 14 points in the process, with the Senators advancing to the playoffs for the 2nd straight year. Now, 14 points in 48 games is not bad when you think about it. Just saying. Senators would eliminate the Montreal Canadiens in 5 games before being eliminated by the Pittsburgh Penguins in 5 games, with Phillips adding 1 assist in 10 playoff games. Now, unfortunately, this would be the last time the Senators would make the playoffs with Phillips on the roster. I'll explain that in a couple of seasons. Now, the 13-14 season would see the NHL realign the divisions, with the Senators now being in the Atlantic Division. That included such teams as the Boston Bruins, the Buffalo Sabres, the Detroit Red Wings, the Florida Panthers, the Montreal Canadiens, the Tampa Bay Lightning, and of course the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, either way, whether it was realignment or just that kind of year, the Senators would fail to make the playoffs, with Phillips adding 14 points in 70 games. The 2014-15 season would be Phillips' last season, and would also see Phillips limited only to 36 games. But the important part of this is that 36th game played on February 5th, 2015 was his 1,179th career game, and every one of them as a member of the Ottawa Senators, which would also set a new team record for most games played with the club, beating Daniel Alfredsson's record, who we've talked about here, by 1 game. Now, it would also be the last game played by Phillips, as he would be on injury reserve for the remainder of the season, managing 3 assists in those 36 games played, his lowest production since his rookie season. Now, it would be during the summer of 2015, with Phillips really trying to make that comeback to playing in the NHL, that Phillips would suffer what would end up being a career-ending injury, with Phillips missing the entirety of the 2015-16 season, thus announcing his retirement on May 6th, 2016. So, cut short, thanks to injury. That sucks. But that is essentially the story of Chris Phillips as an Ottawa Senator. So let's talk some numbers. So again, a team record 1,179 games played, saw 71 goals, 217 assists, and 288 points. Now, if we're talking playoffs, that's 114 games played, 6 goals, 9 assists, and 15 points. Now, no major awards or honors to speak of, nor are we talking Hockey Hall of Fame inductee as of this recording. But his number was retired by the Ottawa Senators on February 18th, 2020. So, here's my opinion of the guy. So again, while not necessarily being a superstar, and this being a guy who was selected first overall, while not being a standard first overall superstar kind of defenseman, in terms of the stay-at-home defenseman, he was one of the best, if not one of the more underrated stay-at-home defensemen. And a guy who obviously had dedication to the team. Obviously, I mean, his name came up in trade rumors countlessly near the end of his career. Now, when the Senators were good, they were good. When they were bad, they were bad. And he was there for all of it. You know, whether it was a short playoff run, an extended playoff run, Phillips was one of the main ingredients every year. And it was always a certainty with Phillips on the blue line, there's not as many goals going in as there is staying out. But all in all, one of the more solid players to have come out of the Ottawa Senators system. So that's another one of Trev's hockey shows. I want to thank you for tuning in. Don't think I don't appreciate the gesture, especially if you've made it to this point. And if you have made it to this point, feel free to give me that thumbs up. Let me know you're here. You want to say hey, you want to say you digging what I'm doing, I would appreciate that thumbs up. I really would. If you want to, that red button that says subscribe all over it, come on, you know you want to. I know you want to. The algorithm knows you want to. Let's do it up. We're chasing 500 on this channel. Let's get there soon. If you want, there's a link in my description that'll take you to my Facebook page. I'd love to build an audience there. So moving forward, well, I got a top 10 that I have to do for the end of the calendar year. So look for that. But either way, in the meantime, and in between time, be looking for more videos with Trev. Data.